Good morning, good afternoon, welcome everyone. My name is Kate Thomas and I'm presenting to you today about being a disruptor for good.
Hello, Kate.
And sorry,
Hello,
do you want me to
Kate.
wait?
How are
Hello,
you? How are you?
I'm very well, thank you.
Yeah. Before going to your session, I would like to introduce you to our audience, Kate.
Thank you.
Yeah. On the behalf of our organization, it is my distinct pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Kate Thomas. Kate Thomas is an award-winning academic and accomplished leader with extensive national and international experience in the higher education sector. Her expertise spans research, collaboration, policy analysis, and strategic planning and community engagement, reflecting the career dedicated to meaningful impact and informed leadership. Known for her engaging and insightful approach, Kate brings both depth of knowledge and practical perspective to her presentations. Please join me. Warmly welcome to the Kate Thomas. And the stage is all yours, Kate. That was a fantastic bio.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the welcome. Hello, my name is Kate Thomas. I am an academic from Australia. I believe that disruption for good is a very important thing that we do, particularly in this day and age around um, the gender equity, the backlash, and a whole range of things that are actually occurring. So what I'd like to do today is bring you a quick keynote on disruptor for good and how important that is. But firstly, I'd just like to acknowledge that we are gathered from many varied places today. And I acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands of which we are meeting. And in Australia here, I'm speaking to you from the lands of the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people in Australia. And I pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and also emerging. And I honour their enduring stewardship and their cultural authority and their resistance to systems designed to erase them. Acknowledgement is not a ritual of politeness. It is a reminder that systems can be dispossessing or they can be dignified, and that leadership can actually silence or restore. That institutional design has consequences that ripple across generations, and we need to be very aware of that. Hence why today we're talking about disruption and disruption for good. Today, it is not just about disruption for its own sake. It's also about responsibility. It's about power, and it's about redesign. And I really want to start with a sentence that may feel both liberating in some situations, but also really quite unsettling. My provocation to you is we need to be disrupting for good and have leadership without permission. The provocation is that sometimes we have systems that we inherit. They are systems, but we are not obliged to actually protect them. So just think about that. Think about those obligations. We don't have obligations to protect. Many of us are educated, socialised, and promoted inside existing systems, and we learn how to navigate them with intelligence. We master their language. We understand how influence moves. We understand how decisions are made and how credibly things are assessed. We become fluent in the grammar of the institution. But it's still the institutions and the systems that are impacting us and creating inequity and creating a lot of bias and frustration and discrimination. And we need to think about that, how we move forward, particularly for women, particularly for those vulnerable populations, those people that have the talent, have the skills, have the desire to be more, but the system and the institution hold them back. Being fluent and having influence it can become an allegiance, and we need to think about that as well. Without realizing it, we can actually begin to defend the very structures that once limited us, simply because we have learned how to survive within them. But systems are not sacred. They are not designed. Our systems, our institutions, they are funded. They are designed, they are measured, they are maintained, and they are human-made. And what humans construct, humans can reconstruct. Change does not begin with ideal conditions. It does not begin with authority. It does not begin with ideal timing or with unanimous support. It does not begin with universal agreement, nor does it not begin when the risks actually disappear. Change, disruption, change begins with awareness. And yes, it does require courage and advances through what I call deliberate action. Today, I really want to dismantle one of the most persistent myths in leadership culture that has been out there for too long. And that myth is disruption has a branding problem. Disruption is seen as something really negative. It's been framed as volatility, as rebellion, as being unprofessional, as being unstable, that instability. Only something that someone reckless takes on or attempts. But disruption, when it is actually anchored in values, it is not destruction. It is leadership under pressure. And leadership is not a title. And we need to talk about leadership here. It is a behaviour. Leadership is about doing the right thing with values and being just. And I will talk about justice leadership shortly. Leadership is a behaviour. It is not positional, and it is not relational, and it is not performative. You do not need to be in a leadership position to have influence, to disrupt, to have power, to create change. Leadership is actually practice, and I want you to think about that and take that away with you. Unfortunately for us, we have an architecture of inherited systems, and I've just fractionally touched on that. But every organisation actually operates within an architecture that predates its current leaders. And this is why it is so important for us to consider disruption and disruption for good. Is it okay for us to hang around and keep seeing these harmful norms and that keeps occurring in the workplace, in organisations? No. Disruption, for me, equals disciplined interruption of harmful norms and a culture shift where there's friction that is actually intentional. Our architecture of inherited systems, the policies are shaped by historical norms. Our promotion pathways are built around outdated assumptions about what we can do, what we can achieve, what label is placed on individuals. Performance metrics are designed around narrow models of success. They are outdated. Cultural expectations that privilege certain communication styles have to be stopped. Certain networks and certain personalities, we have to challenge it. We have to disrupt this. This inheritance of systems feels permanent because it's so familiar. But familiarity is not neutrality. I want you to ask yourself a few things. Who designed the original criteria of the organisation you work for? Whose experience was considered standard? Whose labour is actually invisible previously and still today? And whose leadership style became the benchmark? Really consider these and take it on board, because considered practices once were widely accepted. And some of these include hiring panels which composed of identical profile. Once upon a time, they were all men. Very few women, or not representative of various cultural backgrounds or various abilities. Informal advancement pipelines built on social proximity. expectations of unpaid labour framed as loyalty, and rigid definitions of professionalism rooted in dominant culture. Once upon a time, leadership actually equated with control rather than collaboration, and we have moved miles beyond that. Leadership is not about control anymore. It's about being adaptive and getting the most out of the resources you have, and the most important resources, our human resources, and seeing the intersectional components of that and the inclusion, the belonging, and what that actually delivers to build and develop and provide an organisational success. At one time, each of these the things I described were seen as an objective. Systems felt stable until someone named their actual impact. Things needed to change, and we know that naming impact actually does create discomfort. But to name practices and their impact, such as women are not getting promoted, why? People with diverse cultures are not getting access to conference funding, why? Naming these things actually creates discomfort, but that is the beginning and often the awareness of insight. And this is what we need to actually disrupt for good. If we refuse to examine our inherited norms, then we become their guardians by default. And as a result, leadership requires examination. I want to talk a little bit about the psychology of permission. There is a really quiet script that many leaders actually internalise. And I put that challenge out for you today to take on board, to really think about this and take this away with you. Many leaders say, no, I'm not going to disrupt, or I'm not going to raise or name things yet. Not from this level, not until I'm more secure, or not until I'm indispensable. So we wait. We wait for tenure, we wait for promotion, we wait for the room to feel safer, and we wait for someone else to speak first. But do systems work that way? Do they transform? Are we resolving that negative impact, that harmful norm? Systems rarely transform because those at the top volunteer to surrender their comfort and not ask those hard questions and not build on that courage. They transform because those within them create pressure for evolution. And that's a very unusual thing to say. But we need to think about how we evolve. Leadership does not reside in job descriptions. It resides in the decisions that we make and how we make those decisions. A question that reframes a discussion is a form of disruption. A pause that disrupts a biased assumption, a request for disaggregated data, a challenge to a hiring criteria, a refusal to rush past impact. These are not dramatic acts. They are disciplined interventions, and they are actually disruptions for good. People often think that disruption has to be something really big, something really spectacular. It doesn't. It could be one small question, one questioning, one naming of a norm. Leadership without permission does not mean recklessness. It means refusing to outsource your values to hierarchy. You may not control the outcomes. You may not shape the conversations, but you can. You can shape the norms. You can question, you can ask. You shape what is discussable. That is influence. And as I said before, influence does not relate to positional authority. Influence relates to your courage, your awareness, your insight of what is going on, the influence that you have. And by taking that step of influencing helps, because influence compounds. Let us speak really, really plainly here. There's a fear and a risk and a moral tension when we talk about influence and leadership and disruption. And we've got to really think about it, about how it impacts on us and going forward. But I want you to think strategically here. I want you to think for the greater good. Yes, disruption carries a risk. Fear of being labelled difficult, fear of losing political capital, fear of exclusion, retaliation, and potentially even career stagnation or worse, career suicide. And for many women and marginalised leaders, that fear is not theoretical. We know the data. We know the backlash patterns. We know how quickly tone can be weaponised, and we know how silence has consequences. Think about this. Silence protects inequity. Silence protects comfort. And silence protects flawed systems from scrutiny. And over time, ultimately, silence fragments integrity, your integrity, who we are, organisational, institutional integrity. And leadership without integrity is maintenance. It's not strategic. It's not just. The question becomes, what kind of risk are you willing to carry? The short-term discomfort of speaking or the long-term cost of complicity? Moral courage is rarely loud. It is steady, it is strategic, and it is persistent. Disruption is a form of adaptive leadership. And let us reframe disruption precisely. Disruption is a disciplined interruption of harmful norms, and I've previously articulated that. It is the refusal to allow, this is how we've done it always, to stand unchallenged. It is the insistence that outcomes reflect stated values. It is the willingness to sit in tension long enough for growth to occur. It is adaptive leadership theory where we distinguish between the technical problems and the adaptive challenges. Technical problems? Well, they are solvable with expertise. Adaptive challenges, however, require shifts in belief, behaviour and culture. And inequity is adaptive. Bias is adaptive. And exclusion is adaptive. So where do you hold power? Where are you exposed? And where can you absorb some of this impact? You cannot spreadsheet your way out of inequity without confronting culture. Culture resists change because culture distributes comfort unevenly or privilege, whatever you would like to call it, however you want to name it. Disruption introduces positive friction, not to shatter the system, but to redefine it. Think of disruption as a recalibration, a subtle but decisive shift in alignment. And if we take on an intersectional and differential consequence look, we need to also understand that not all disruption carries equal cost. The same behaviour is interpreted differently depending on who embodies it. A woman leader advocating firmly may be labelled as abrasive. A radicalised colleague raising concerns may be labelled as confrontational. A younger professional challenging assumptions may be dismissed as inexperienced. And a disabled leader may be unfairly perceived as less capable. Bias does not disappear in leadership spaces. It becomes more sophisticated. And when we discuss courage, we must also discuss positionality. Ask yourself, where do I hold institutional power? Where do I lack it? When I speak, how am I actually interpreted? When others speak, how are they interpreted? Disruption for good requires both self-awareness and also collective responsibility. Those with power and influence must use it. Those with vulnerability must be supported. And solidarity transform individual risk into a shared movement. So let's talk about operationalizing equity and what that actually means for us. As I was alluding to before, equity is not philosophical. Yeah, it is operational. It lives in budgets, it lives in job descriptions, it's in meeting agendas, it's in performance reviews, it's in succession planning, procurement decisions, who is compensated for what, who is asked to volunteer. If equity is not embedded in operations, then it becomes tokenistic. It is symbolic. And what we require is justice-driven leadership, which requires an audit to actually look at this, to see how it's become more sophisticated and inequitable, unequal. I want you to go away and audit your recruitment pathways. I want you to audit your promotion data. I want you to audit your compensation gaps. I want you to audit your speaking invitations. Who carries the invisible labour? Then I want you to think about redesigning it. Disruption is often really invisible to the outside observer. It may look like, and these can be really simple, rewriting criteria, expanding search parameters, creating transparent pathways, standardizing evaluation processes and rubrics, funding access supports, rotating opportunity rather than just constantly giving it to the same people. These changes are quiet, but they are so significant and massive in terms of outcome and impact. They are structural, and structure determines outcome. Let's look at the relational strategy up, down, and across. No leader or person of influence disrupts alone. There are three key things that we really need to do. We need to engage up. We need to translate equity into strategic advantage. We need to connect inclusion to performance and sustainability. We know that if people feel included and they belong, they are more likely to be more effective and efficient and stay with organisations and give the best that they can potentially give. Connection is important. We also frame justice as excellence. We can engage down. We can create safety. We can reward accountability. We can model reflective, adaptable, and just leadership. And we can protect emerging voices. And we can also engage across by building those coalitions, sharing that information that we need, that data, that breaking it down, coordinated timing, and we need to make sure that we're avoiding isolation. Change rarely happens because of a single speech. It really happens because of sustained alignment to what we're actually doing. And it comes from that constant pressure, that constant questioning, naming, asking, having the courage to do it. At the moment, we are in that backlash era. And all across the globe, we are experiencing backlash, whether it be reduction of funding, the pulling away of strategy, the lack of job positions around equity, diversity. We need to think about it. At the moment, we are operating in a context where equity language is so politicised, where inclusion initiatives are scrutinised, where regression is not hypothetical, it is real. In this climate, we need to be clever around disruption and we must be really disciplined. And more than ever, we require it to be disrupting for good. Ground your arguments in evidence. Align your proposals with a mission. Demonstrate measurable impact and communicate them calmly and clearly. Justice does not require a big, spectacular end. It requires persistence. And often, yeah, we all do it. Retreat may feel so much safer, but retreat normalizes regression. We cannot afford impulsive disruption where people then feel that they must retreat. We cannot afford surrender. What we need is strategic courage as the pathway forward. Burnout is not proof of commitment. We need to think about sustainable leadership or sustainable influencing. Exhaustion does not strengthen systems. We all know that. It actually weakens us as leaders. Sustainable disruption requires pacing, small bites, shared labour, rotate advocacy, celebrate those small incremental stages and progresses, build networks of care, and invest in restoration. You are not required to sacrifice your well-being to provide or prove your integrity. Leadership is a long horizon practice. It's the long game. It's strategic. It's taking on board, hearing those voices, co-designing, getting that data, and disrupting and making sure that we're listening up, down, and across. Systems shift through sustained pressure, not heroic collapse. So getting towards the end here, I want to give you a framework for daily practice. This is something for you to take away. It's called the notice, name, nudge, and normalize. Apply this framework. I want you to notice what patterns are actually repeating, what norms, what things we inherited in the systems and the structures that constantly repeat, that we keep doing it the same way, that are causing harm, that are not causing equality or equity. Where is the harm disguised as efficiency? Notice these things. Be curious, be inquisitive. Where is the silent being strategic because bias and inequity has become more sophisticated? I want you to name it. Clearly articulate what it actually is. What is that norm? What is that strategy, policy? What is that experience? Connect it to the shared values. Anchor it in evidence and stay precise. And then what I want you to do is actually nudge, which is, hey, the point of disruption for good. I want you to propose some pilots, the things that could change up, working with those early adopters that you have got. Okay? Think about it. Who else are an early adopter that shares the values that also may have the influence that can help you move along? Propose those pilots. Revise the language so it is more neutral, it is more inclusive, it's less privileged and less biased. Shift that criteria so it's not all men on promotion and panels. Why aren't we actually representing the community that we're actually serving? Why aren't there more women or more First Nations or more people of different abilities or different cultural backgrounds on panels that actually understand what we're trying to achieve? Shift that criteria, build those allies, and measure that impact of your pilots. And then what I want you to do is normalize it. Embed your change. Talk about it as something that is really, really positive. Look at how you've actually made that process, codify it. What did you do? What made it work? And protect those gains. This is actually about changing structures. This is not about fixing individuals. Where so many strategies are in play, particularly in the gender equity area, is around getting quotas and fixing individuals. If we actually fix the structures, then we are opening up the door for equity and equality across the board. If we remove those barriers for one, then we're removing those barriers for many. So then what I want you to do is really teach others how to replicate this, okay? Teach others the importance daily of this framework, this daily framework, to notice, to name, to nudge, and to normalise. And this is what I call leadership without permission, because you do not need to be in a leadership role to actually do this. I just want to leave you with a bit of a lived experience story, of which a friend of mine was in an executive of a fairly large health-related company, and her experience was really the fact that, you know, the same person always chaired every meeting that they went to, whether it be executive meeting or operational meeting. So it got a bit stuck. And only certain people would talk at these meetings or would talk over the top of. So you can see there's real problems beginning to evolve here, where their voice was not seen as being valued and they were not giving their lived experience or their ideas and strategies. In the end, what she did was actually looked at meetings. They were recorded. So she actually looked about who was speaking for how long, who was spoken over the top out. And then she realised there was a pattern, that the women in the room or people who had diversity were not being, I suppose, given the same opportunity as other executives. So she presented that data back to the chair, back to the executive, and said, we need to think about other ways to move forward. And what basically happened is that everyone then had the ability and had a turn to respond to options, events, projects, everything that was given there. If they didn't want to take that on board, they could do that. But that is one really simple, very simple, practical example about how disruption can actually occur. So everyone's voices could be heard, and that the same things, the inherited systems and structures, were not being perpetuated. And I love this quote. She said, I didn't need them to like my disruption. I needed the system to evolve because of it. And that's exactly what happened. So this is a bit of a reflection as I close out from this session. I want you to think of one system that you operate in, not in the abstract, but the specific. What norm have you accepted because it's easier? Who benefits and who absorbs the cost? What small recalibration could begin today? Not revolution, it's alignment. And remember, change compounds. Culture evolves incrementally. And the final question, I suppose, is, if not you, who? If not now, when? You do not need unanimous approval. You do not need perfect safety. You do not need a higher title. You need awareness, and you need that courage, and you need a strategy. Just please remember that the systems we inherit are not sacred artifacts. They are not. They are living designs, and living designs can evolve. Disruption is not rebellion. It is stewardship. It is leadership aligned with justice, and it's influence aligned with integrity. And at the end of the day, action aligned with values always delivers positive outcomes. So as I leave you now, I want you to think about this. I do not want you to be reactive. I want you to be strategic, grounded, calm, and persistent. I want you to be confident and deliberate. And using the frameworks that I presented today will give you the ability to disrupt for good. Every meeting you're in is a point of leverage. Every policy that is written can be edited. Every norm is negotiable, and every budget line, as far as I'm concerned as a leader, tells a story. So go out there and disrupt for good, not for applause, not to create a magical spectacle, and not for performance. I want you to do it for impact, for access, for fairness, for sustainability, and for equity. For those whose leadership is still being shaped by the system you influence, it's really, really important that you take this on board. Leadership does not wait for permission. It moves. Think about that. Thank you so much. I'm happy to take any questions if there are any available. In your experience, how does policy analysis for strategic planning in education? It's really, really important, particularly around education. We really need to think about the intersectional nature of individuals and how policy is applied to individuals. A lot of times when we develop any planning or policy process, we look at what I call homogenisation of strategy. We build policy for the majority of individuals. So policy is going to bias or discriminate against certain individuals. And so when we're looking at policy analysis, it's really important that your data and how you treat that data is intersectional in nature. We don't want to know whether women are more disadvantaged than men. Well, we do, but what we want to know within that are things like what type of women are being disadvantaged. Are women who have got cultural different backgrounds more disadvantaged than women with disabilities, or women who identify themselves as queer? We need to understand the intersectional nature of individuals that go through there. So it's really important that we do that. Olive, what a great question. How do I motivate myself? I am very much social justice driven, and I believe that I, as an individual, has lots of intersections myself. I have hidden disabilities. I identify as being queer. I know how I don't fit in the system. And I think for me, motivating for me is identifying that, we can do this better. And it basically came about because I was being discriminated on and asked to sit on so many different things when I could just be asked once what my lived experience is and how I could co-design things. That's what really motivates me. Any little incremental change that will benefit people across the board from a social justice point of view, that's what motivates me. It could be so, so small, but it's so, so important. And I suppose educating others about how I've created change and how it's worked is so motivational within itself, because I want you to go out there. I want you to do the same, and don't be fearful of it. You don't need to be fearful. Just have the courage. Find those people that think like you. Find those early adopters. Build that solidarity. Build those certifying bodies. Build those evaluations. Always think about it intersectionally. And then you will have the motivation to go forward. We don't ever do it alone. Coming to conferences like this is exactly one way. This in itself is motivating for me. It makes me aware, it takes me back to my grassroots about what I need to do, and also reflect on what I need to do moving forward. Any lucky last minutes? Questions? My details are there on this last slide. I'm more than happy for you to send me an email. I'm happy to stay in contact with you, share further experiences and ideas, and go from there. So thank you very much.
Yeah. Wow, Kate, that was a wonderful presentation. We really enjoyed your presentation, and our audience also gained a lot of knowledge from your session. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Kate. Please stay on the backstage and join the next session, Kate.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.